and it is our release day for our 2022 hurricane season forecast. I'm meteorologist Eric Burris. I've been working for months on this, and on March 1st, we're making it an annual event. We release our hurricane season forecast. The reason we do this is because it gives us an idea on what kind of a season we're looking ahead to. And the WESH 2 hurricane season forecast is a little different. We don't just talk about numbers, we actually dive into where and when conditions seemingly are more favorable for tropical impacts. This is something of a new theory in the meteorological community, and I can tell you, while this is the second year we've gone public with this, I have case studied and worked behind the scenes for years and years. As a matter of fact, if we look at last year, before we get to this year's forecast, if we look at last year's hotspots we called, and all the storms in general, aside from a couple, 75%, what it ended up being, 75% of the storms that we called for hit exactly where and when we said that would happen. Okay? It's really a fascinating thing. So, with that said, let's get right down to it. I will tell you that Jeremy Nelson, who's the chief meteorologist at WJCL TV in Savannah, Georgia, will be joining me in just a few minutes to talk about this. Jeremy and I have worked for months on this, okay? So, if you're new to long-range forecasting and if you're new to our hurricane forecast, let's just start off by talking about how this is possible. Now, there's going to be a full write-up inside wesh.com. That's going to be made available, I believe, at about 8:30 this morning, okay? I will also tell you I will be taking all your questions at the end, so you'll have to bear with me. I'm just going to bark for a little bit, and then we can take your questions. Okay, how does our long-range forecast work? What we do is we look for these yearly patterns that set up. This is all based on what's referred to as the LRC, the Lezak recurring cycle. We've had Gary Lezak on. We're going to have Gary Lezak on, talking about his forecasting, how he's picked up on this, the whole 9 yards. But we're using, among other things, the NAO, the AAO, El Nino, La Nina, all these different factors. But the main focal point for our long-range forecast is the LRC. During the year, October and November particularly, you watch these weather patterns establish themselves. Then you start to see these weather patterns looping over and over again, okay? If you've watched Coffee Talk for a while, you know during October, I'm like, oh, well, this will be interesting as it comes back. Oh, this will be interesting as it comes back. Here we are. I've put the work in, and now it's time for us to look at those interesting features. And what you do, the first key is to see how long the yearly cycle is. Each year is a different duration. Once you establish the yearly duration, then you start waiting for these things to play back through and play back through and play back through. And that gives you an idea of what to look out for. So this year, we identify, it's so weird to me because I've worked so hard at this. And I remember saying this last year too. It's so weird because you put so much work into it. And here we're finally to the point where we can discuss it and put it all out there. So it's really kind of surreal. So these are the big weather features that we focused on and found. There are 5 big weather features that we have found, okay? Based on that, here are the hotspots for this year's hurricane season. The main hotspot, we think, is the Florida Peninsula. Oh, great. The secondary hotspot is going to be into the coastal Carolinas. Oh, great. Well, ironically, the two people that authored this forecast cover either coastal Carolina or the Sunshine State. And with that said, I want to take a moment and welcome in Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson from WJCL. Jeremy, good morning, my friend.
Hey, good morning. Big day, huh?
It's It's a lot of time and a lot of work put into this. So we just put it out there. There's our hurricane season forecast. Would you do me a favor and just kind of elaborate a little bit more on how we came to these points being our focal points this year?
Okay, well, one thing that Eric just showed was the low pressure areas, and those are definitely the key. You want to pick out where those lows are at, kind of where they're the strongest, where they track, and also another component is if there's some upper level support. And you were mentioning the hotspot down around the Florida Peninsula, and I'd say of some of the time frames that he'll go over, we definitely have some upper level support by I would say, what was that, down by maybe West Palm area?
Yeah, 100%.
Down there, and then another one that kind of goes off the southeast coast.
Yep. All right. So with that said, that's the wide shot of the hotspots. Let's go kind of storm by storm, and we'll start with this one. October 7th through the 9th. And I'm going to bring it full screen, but Jeremy, you and I can just chat about it. So October 7th through 9th, there was a little storm system that kind of started forming off of the east coast of Florida and worked its way off toward the north and east. One advantage we have this year is, Jeremy, we found archived satellite imagery, which will help us tell this story, I think, a little bit better, right?
Yes.
So
I like that.
There's the storm system, and you can kind of make out that counterclockwise spin as it's kind of getting its act together. But as it moved toward coastal Carolina, Jeremy, and this is your storm to really watch, as it moved toward the coastal Carolinas, it looked like it started to gain a little bit of steam. Perhaps that's the window of strengthening there.
Yeah, and at that point, it's going over the Gulf Stream too, so pretty warm water.
So there's the highlighted hotspot for that one. Late June and late August. This year's cycle duration, Jeremy, about 64-ish days. It's kind of shifted a little quicker, a little slower in the cycle, but that's kind of the duration we're looking at. So nearly 2 months. And that's going to play in big. And Jeremy, we'll talk about the numbers for the season after we get through the hotspots, just so that you know.
Okay.
Because Jeremy...
And one thing I want to mention with, I think it was that system right there, that the Hurricane Center had a 40% chance of development with that one as it moved to the northeast.
Oh, okay. See, this is why, what do they say? If you're, always surround yourself with people smarter than you are,
Well, this is Eric's favorite. I do tons of handwritten notes. And I had that over here on the side. Yeah. 40% chance of development as that moved away.
When I do my logging, it's all on like a Google Doc, an Excel spreadsheet. And so I make fun of Jeremy incessantly for writing paper notes. It's a loving thing. What can you do? All right. So there are, out of the five storm systems we tracked, 3 of them trigger hotspots. 2 of them are a little bit of a lesser signal. So that's the first main signal. The second main signal was, as Jeremy mentioned, this area of low pressure that kind of started getting going. It did have the upper level support, and it was right on the heels of that Carolina low, October 11th and 12th. Take a look at the satellite imagery. And it's so very clear. You can see the upper low, and you can kind of see the surface low getting together. Over the Gulf Stream waters, that there, October 11th, a very clear indicator. And because of that, we have the east coast and the southeast coast of Florida highlighted. This is originating from an October 11th and 12th kind of storm system. But when does it recycle? Same time frame, right? Late June and late August. Now this one, Jeremy, it's kind of interesting because you have 2 features back to back. So when that cycles forward, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get like 2 massive hurricanes back to back on the East Coast.
Yeah, and I also think, obviously, the front end of that time frame, which you showed there, the 11th, 12th for Florida, but also we've noticed that window almost opens from maybe the 7th to about the 15th or 14th of October, because just south of Florida, I would say Cuba, Bahamas, and maybe Northern Caribbean, kind of down in that area, had this upper low sitting there. So I think that is probably going to be, if we had to pick out maybe a week-long stretch in hurricane season to watch, it's probably that one.
Yeah, so mark your calendars. It's kind of funny, Jeremy. I put in my my vacation requests at the office prior to us finishing the LRC. So like now I'm sitting here and I'm thinking like, oh man, I didn't even think to consult this year. So I'm curious because late June and late August, those are going to be kind of that time frame that we really, I think, have a very active stretch. Those two windows there for sure.
Right.
All right. The next one, my least favorite to talk about, November 6th. When we were doing Coffee Talk, this ended up becoming a nor'easter. And because of the way that it's set up off of our East Coast, as it moved from the Gulf Coast to the East Coast and crossed the peninsula, we lovingly called this the Floreaster. And we've been talking about this on Coffee Talk a couple of different times. Here is a look at the satellite imagery from November 6th, and there it is as it was a Floreaster. The counterclockwise spin, it started here in the Gulf, and then it kind of crossed over the peninsula. There you have it there, and then it worked out to sea. So that's November 6th, the first version of the Floreaster. Then there's January 13th, the second version of the Floreaster, as it was crossing the peninsula and moving through. And may I just add, if I share the GFS model as it reads today, top right corner, 12Z, so that's the morning of Friday, March 11th, watch the Gulf of Mexico here. You see that right there? That will be, and Jeremy, I don't even know if you've seen this yet. That's the third version there, according to the computer models, of the Floreaster. Now, timing, this, that, adjustments, all that. But the bottom line is it's already showing up on our computer models. So because of that, this, I think, is perhaps the most interesting feature of the three. We're highlighting the West Coast and the East Coast of Florida for the Floreaster and focusing on three timelines. Mid-May, again, that's before hurricane season, but don't be surprised if we all kind of put our little antennas up, our spider senses start to tingle as something develops and you're like, oh, it's near hurricane season. Then late July and then late September. Jeremy, out of everything we've tracked, I think this is the one that has both of us really watching closely.
Yeah, because it first originates in the Gulf. So obviously the water there, the environment is usually pretty good for some sort of development. And it then moves over Florida. And then we were even debating whether we needed maybe a little sliver of parts of the Carolinas highlighted. We didn't do that, but it's a system that they could even watch as well. It's usually stayed off from the coast, and it models this time around. Again, they're very far out, a couple weeks, but they also kind of take that same general track.
Now, one theory that you and I have been tossing back and forth this year has been this idea of one cycle of storm system being stronger, one cycle of storm system being weaker, and we actually have some pretty decent data to show that, which is why we put the little red icon next to late July. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I think we'll get a good trial run of this because the November version so far was the strongest.
Right.
And not that you necessarily have very strong storms down by you in January, the last time it cycled through. So I think this next time will be give us sort of a good indication. And then, as you mentioned, in May, we'll just kind of watch that. It seems like every single year there's like one of those hatched areas somewhere, maybe Gulf, Northern Caribbean, that gets going. And this one, I know I mentioned it with that, I think 7th to 9th one. This one did have a Hurricane Center 30 to 50% area to watch, but it wasn't until it got to the North Atlantic.
Right.
And again, this was in November, so the water was kind of starting to cool.
Yeah.
But something to watch. If you compare, is this the last hotspot that you had?
This is the last of those three, yeah, and then we get to the yellow.
Okay, so one thing I'll say, this isn't the fall of 20, let's say 20, where we had Eta, Zeta, and Delta, where those were just such clear home run systems. And that's why maybe when you get to the end here, everything will kind of make sense to everyone.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, Jeremy, and I've told this story a million times, Jeremy is the guy that brought me into this. And it's been like 5 years. So for the first 3 years, I said nothing on TV, nothing on broadcast, nothing on social about it. I just kind of sat back and observed. But going into this LRC year, I told Jeremy, out of everything that I've ever tracked, because we didn't have these October, November tropical features, This was really the most difficult hurricane season forecast that I have been a part of or observed.
Not only no maybe strong tropical indicators, but also a long cycle duration.
That, yeah, right, that too, right. 40 days, 45 days. Here we're 64 days. Like, oh, you Gewalt.
Right.
All right.
Yeah. So I know you've been doing this maybe kind of paying attention 4 or 5 years. I believe this is like my 15th year using this.
Yeah.
And I do remember another cycle duration that was around about 60 to 62. So I have seen the longer ones, but more often than not, they're probably like 42 to about 52 or so days.
Yeah, yeah. Those are a little easier because you get more versions of them
Yeah,
cycling
you get
through.
more. I mean, I just look at it each time a cycle goes through, it's another clue.
Right. And the more data you have to prepare, the more data you have to prepare. Okay, so those were the three main features that indicate for hurricane season. There are two others that we want to focus on, Jeremy. We'll start with the October 24th, 25th, 26th storm system. If you recall, here in Central Florida, our Halloween was nice and cool, and it was partially because this storm system kind of helped to drag through a cold front. But what's interesting is that where this goes, yeah, that's going to be kind of an interesting little feature there. So here it is, a look at our highlighted areas, and it does indicate the potential of a northeastern scrape or something close-ish to the northeast.
Yeah, I think there could be like some sort of coastal storm, whether it does touch the coast or not. We've had some indicators with some of these nor'easters up there, and last year I don't think it wasn't a miss on like the LRC. I think it was more of like we didn't mention it.
Right.
There were definitely indicators for Henri, which
Oh, right.
was a tropical system that made landfall in basically this area. So I think we have the indicators this year that we were just like, hey, let's maybe just kind of have this be a little area of interest and
Yeah.
put the time frame out there.
Yeah, and it was so interesting because when like folks on my weather team, Jeremy, when we talked about Henri, and I said, the signal was there, it just it didn't stand out to you and I, and if you go back and case study it every time, like there's that low, it just happened to be a little further to the west this particular time. Here's a look. I don't know why I was a little out of order on my slides, but this is that October 25th low, and you could kind of see. You can kind of see it gearing up just off the coast there of the Carolinas as it's working into the northeast United States, like right in here, right there. So that'll be interesting. And then, last but not least, this little storm system off the coast of the Texas-Mexico border there kind of lifted to the north and then worked off toward the east. This is the November version. Didn't look like much here, okay, if you look just off the coast of Texas. But look at how much more interesting this feature was come February, rolling on right there. I mean, it almost looks, it's got like that tropical-esque look to it. And that's February. And I remember on Coffee Talk saying to everybody like, well, this wasn't showing up the last cycle, so I need to go back and look and see how this plays out, Here's that highlighted area. Again, it's not a main hotspot, but rather just kind of an area of interest, we're calling it. This is early to mid-June and then mid-August, Jeremy.
So I think overall the Gulf, if you take Florida out of the mix, is probably a little bit quieter this year, but if there is an area to watch, probably kind of that Texas to Louisiana area again. And
yeah,
obviously that part of Louisiana has had multiple landfalls here in the last couple of years.
Right. Which, if we can give them a little bit of a break, it certainly is encouraging. So with the hot spots and the areas of interest shown, this is the overall picture. But again, the main objectives, the main eyes are on these two zones, Florida and the coastal Carolinas. Now, one thing, Jeremy, and I'm going to let you take this away because you are the doctor of all this data. One thing that we're also looking at this year is the overall number of storms. And if you wouldn't mind, going over kind of the idea here, we're calling for in terms of numbers of storms.
Yeah. So every 10 years, they update the 30-year averages, which are now 14, 7, and 3 for named storms, hurricanes, major hurricanes. Last year we had 21 named storms. Season before that, 30. So it's been extremely active over the last couple of years in that time frame. I think I had something like, was it 19 landfalls? I believe over the last 2 years.
I could look.
I think it's 19. I
Okay.
think it was 11 and 8.
Okay.
Yeah, it was 11 and 8 if you break it down year by year. So yeah, so the forecasts we think, and again, did you talk about before I hopped on any type of La Nina, anything?
No, this is that section, and because
Oh,
you
okay.
were dove the deepest in that, I'll let you do this part. The La Nina impact graphic is after this one.
Okay, so this is kind of the season as a whole, thinking it'll be quieter than the last couple of years, but there still will be activity. I mean, 14 named storms.
Yeah.
That's still a decent amount. That's getting you through that second column of storm names.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And one of the big players, as we had talked about, is we monitor El Ninos and La Ninas. You did a really deep dive going through the analogs over the last 100 years of data. We're displaying the last four just to go kind of apples to apples with averages. But please take it away and explain everything.
Okay, all right. So first off, people hear a lot about El Nino and La Nina. So La Nina, even though it may be thousands of miles away, it's a strip of cooler than average water in the Pacific Ocean. So that has existed now for 2 years. So we've had back-to-back La Ninas. So that can impact not only sea surface temperatures, but also our upper level winds. So in studying the hurricane season that follows the second La Nina, hopefully I'm not confusing everyone. So we've had back-to-back La Ninas, and then the hurricane season that follows the second one, we found 8 years of data, all the years pretty much lined up. But Eric had a little better idea since all the data was lining up. He was like, well, our average numbers come from the last 30 years. So let's basically, let's just take the La Ninas that fell within that time frame to make the averages sort of work out here. So the last 4 times it's happened, which is basically the year 2000, 2009, 2012, and 2018, there are the numbers for it. You can see it definitely trends closer to an average hurricane season. And then Eric can probably talk about the ACE number down there.
Yeah, so ACE, it stands for Accumulated Cyclone Energy. And this is getting super in the weeds, but frankly, if you've made it this far, you're in the weeds. The idea is, as a tropical system exists, it generates ACE. It's a scorecard of sorts. The bigger it is, the stronger it is, the longer it lives. These are all taken into account. So when you look at ACE as a whole, it just gives you an idea of tropical cyclone energy, right? How much cyclonic energy did we have in a single storm or in a season as a whole? And on the left column there, the average over the last 30 years is 122.6. That's all you need to know. Use that as a benchmark. But in these 4 occurrences where you followed 2 La Nina years going into a third hurricane season, that ACE score was consistently lower. It averaged at 109.2. And that plays pretty big into our overall forecast for this kind of at average season. And Jeremy, the landfalling elements of this, I think, are even more interesting.
Yeah, so right there we're showing 4 years of data. And in those 4 years, there were 4 US landfalls, 3, 1, and 2. So those numbers are a lot less.
Yeah.
And one other thing, I have all the La Nina stuff here, so that's why I keep looking over here. But when we kind of went even further and further and further and looked, the 1 year we were like, wow, there's 1 year in here that only had 11 named storms, but 8 of those made landfall along the U.S. coastline, and 6 of them were hurricanes that year. Now, we went back to the previous fall because remember, the pattern is setting up. So in the fall of 1984, it was very active in the tropics. So that was an indicator. So maybe the overall pattern with just say the La Nina element wasn't that supportive, and there were only 11 named storms. But if you kind of use the LRC, those indicators were there, and there ended up being 6 hurricane landfalls.
And go back to how major hurricane and how Michael, because that was kind of an odd outlier.
Right. Okay. So in looking at those La Nina years, we found that there were only of the 8 years, only three major hurricanes ever made landfall on the U.S. coastline, and one of those was in 2018 was Hurricane Michael. That was a little bit different because what was that? October what?
That was October, the end of October, if I recall.
Earlier October, I think, maybe the 10th ish.
Oh, okay. So it was the beginning of the LRC year.
Yeah, so that was though again a little was that new pattern was it old pattern type of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall it looks like the hurricane numbers. If you look at all the years, that you average point 0.4 major hurricane landfalls along the U.S. coast. 1.5 hurricane landfalls, and that number gets a little bit skewed with that 1985. So it's probably closer to one.
So the overall idea here is that, you know, when we look at the year as a whole, it seems like history tells us, following these two La Ninas going into a third season, we are usually backing things off a little bit. If you remember, as Jeremy had mentioned, we've had two very, very busy years. We used every single name in the hurricane names list the last 2 years. The first year we went into the Greek alphabet, they did away with it. We didn't get into the secondary list this past year, but we got right up to it. So based on that, when we look at this year's forecast, here's your TLDR section. The season's forecast, we're calling for about an average number of named storms. And interestingly enough, take 1984 for what it was with the busy October, November timeframe. So going into 85, it was busy because of that. We don't have that busy 2021 season in October and November, which would more lend into a nearly average season. I love, Jeremy, when people are like, y'all never call for an average season. It's always scare tactics. Yeah. Here we go.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, if we were trying to talk about putting actual numbers on it, it's so tough. Because if you look back, and I know they do some reanalysis of these previous years, but if you don't have the satellite data, you can't really go back to some of these years like we have the satellites now, where in the National Hurricane Center director, when I interviewed him last year, he said part of the increase in storm names, there's a lot of things that go into it, but just better technology. They're able to like pinpoint things that may be way out in the Atlantic that they used to never name that now get named. So that's sort of one part of others that go into the actual averages have gone up a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's tough to get a below average season, but I think this one definitely should be getting closer to average.
So there you go, friends. Near average numbers. Florida is in a hot spot. And before you know, I'm going into a make fun of people moment here. Before you say, well, you said Florida was going to get hit last year and it didn't get hit. That's actually incorrect, because if you remember, the Eta part of the pattern in 2020, highlighted in yellow here, gave us the idea of a hot spot in the Big Bend. Elsa and Fred hit nearly identically in those positions. So Florida got hit. It just wasn't this massive Category 5, but Florida 100% got hit. And if you look at our hotspot, Jeremy, we didn't do too bad. Quiet.
No, well, didn't Elsa track just very, very close to that west coast of Florida?
Yeah, well, yeah, Elsa highlighted in red here. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Look at how close Elsa and Eta were right there. Fred was a little further west, but look at Elsa and Eta. They were so close.
Right.
And Eta, highlighted in yellow, was the storm that indicated that hotspot for us last year. And then another thing, I just have to point out, going back to 2020, Zeta is in blue. Claudette made landfall last year. Just was it 20 miles away? I mean, if you look at those two lines, they're almost identical.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. And then, of course, as I mentioned in the write-up that I did, probably one of the biggest, at least forecast success. We're not wanting tropical activity anywhere, but the system that produced Ida, we had that one clearly identified well in advance.
Yeah. All right. So, questions, comments, concerns, we are now opening up to anybody's question. There have been a ton of people writing in, and we've just been kind of barking all the information out. So Michelle asks, how many this year are we thinking for Florida? Jeremy, it's just such a hard question to answer.
Wait, what was that?
How many this year are you thinking for Florida? Yeah.
I don't know. So when I talk about the hotspots, to me, it's just represents areas with an above average chance of seeing one or more tropical systems making landfall.
Yeah.
And again, that's based on the pattern. So it's not a 100%, hey, these areas are going to see a landfall. It's an above average chance based on the pattern. I don't know. I'm really curious to see if that low that's part of that November 5th, 6th time frame, if it starts off in the Gulf and it's sort of peak season or around there and the water is really warm, that one might have the best potential.
Yep.
But I really think all those little lows that kind of October 7th to about 14th or so that are just kind of hanging around the Bahamas, Cuba, down there, that could develop into something.
And it's clearly the hot spots this year are those are the clear spots. You know, Florida's peninsula Florida, from the Big Bend all the way through the Keys and basically up through like Volusia, Flagler. You know, that's because you've got, out of the three main impactors, two of those are Florida. So that very clearly stands out as the hot spot to watch. And then coastal Carolina, you know, the Florida may check in that zone as well. So, you know, those are very clearly the spots. The Gulf Coast, somebody was just asking, you know, what's the opportunity for a Cat 4 or 5 to go into Houston, Texas? First off, it's March 1st. We cannot get into specifics. That is just not possible. But, you know, of these hotspots, we're not highlighting Texas, meaning, yeah, Texas could see a storm. We're showing the areas that the overall patterns indicate have a higher likelihood of seeing a storm make an impact.
One question, I had your Facebook page up there, and I know they kind of fly by. Someone was like, well, isn't Florida always climatologically in a hot spot?
That's a great question.
Probably the best example ever of a LRC forecast was 2 years ago.
I'll pull it up right now while you're talking.
Okay, so 2 years ago, we had, 30 named storms?
It was the busiest hurricane season on record. Let's see here.
Yep. And we did not have the Florida Peninsula in the hot spot.
There you go.
And nothing hit the Florida Peninsula. And remember, we're talking about through early October. So I don't think anything hit it after that. But yes, through early October that year, we did not have the Florida Peninsula. And there were tons and tons of storms that year. So that was a year. That was a year we left the Florida Peninsula out, so that was probably going against climatology.
Well, and as Jeremy said, you know, that ended up being the busiest hurricane season on record, right? If you would, and this is the way I've heard Jeremy, you say this before, if you would have told me if you would have said, this is going to be the busiest hurricane season ever, and I'm saying Florida isn't going to get hit, you'd probably respond with, yeah, right.
Right. Yeah.
But there you go. Let's see here. I just moved to Alabama from Orlando. Is there a major threat for this year for Alabama? We did not highlight Alabama as having a major threat. No. Let's see here. Shannon says, I know you said the other day was pretty impressive. What's the accuracy rate for the LRC predictions last year? We did 75% of where and when tropical systems would impact last year. So, you know, this is not just climatology. There is a lot of science and data analyzation going into this.
And when you gave that number, that's storms that were within the hot spots.
Yes.
6 of 8 last year, and I believe the year before. Remember the year before, we just take it through like early October, so that Zeta, I think, and maybe
it was just Ada that year. It was just Ada.
Were okay. were after that. So
So Brian's
um,
asking, since we rarely see East Coast Florida landfall, is this year's hotspot indicating more East Coast landfall potential?
I think
Yeah.
potential. I could also see something form and then just kind of slide up that southeast coast. So bring up the map that you had with all the lows, and you mentioned, and you have the little dates next to them,
Yep.
just kind of like the indicators.
Yep.
Um, Remember the last few years, a lot of these have been like, oh my gosh, look at all the lows in the Gulf and where they tracked. Well, this year, I mean, most of everything is kind of off the southeast coast or down near Florida.
Yeah. Yeah. And we, think about it too. We've had a very cloudy, kind of dreary winter. And it's because of all these lows trekking through and then recycling through. So that does all play into it, it's very, very interesting.
Yeah. And I kind of like what you said, where a lot of people start to think, well, every hurricane forecast that comes out now is just going to be like, oh my gosh, it's going to be the worst year ever, whatever. So again, what we are looking at is the pattern, total number of storms we think, and maybe the kind of the energy with them. But I always go back to look at the year Hurricane Andrew hit. That was the first storm of the year. It
Yeah.
wasn't an active year, but you can still get um, hurricanes.
Max Mayfield, until he's blue in the face, talks about Andrew and says, think about it. August, first name storm. That's like that's a boring season. Everybody, and then you get a Category 5 plowing right into Miami-Dade County. So, or excuse me, back then it was just Dade County. It takes one storm, and a great example could even be last year, Jeremy, where we had two tropical systems make landfall on the West Coast. They weren't terribly strong. They didn't make a terribly big impact on us here. As a matter of fact, I think that they made more impacts up in your area in the low country of South Carolina, right?
Yeah, or are you talking about the ones like Elsa?
Yeah,
And
Elsa and Fred.
yeah, we had like three tornadoes, some damage when Elsa moved through.
Right, right. I still think water's still above average. So Dory's pointing out temperature, sea surface temperatures.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at last fall when these lows were there, the water I'm sure was above average. I
Yep.
don't think it was below average, especially in October. Things did cool down quickly in November, but just above average water alone isn't 100% guarantee
Right.
that a low will develop. It takes a lot of different ingredients, not only at the surface, but aloft.
Right.
Maybe there was some dry air around it. So there was just something last fall that these things just couldn't quite get going. And it was really once the new pattern kind of set up, it was after October 5th. I think we had one named storm, and that was Wanda, and it was way up in the
Right.
North Atlantic.
Yeah, it was a fish storm named Wanda. And what was so remarkable is following the LRC, and everybody that's in Coffee Talk that's followed this pointed out, it's like, oh, you can tell something has dramatically changed because as soon as we entered into that new LRC cycle, it was like the tropics shut off. Which is fine, but because we were getting to the end of the named storm list, and everybody's like, "Are we going to use this secondary name list?" And then we get into the new LRC cycle, it shuts off, and then you're just kind of hanging out, and there's nothing going on. So, yeah, very interesting. Okay, Ryan's asking an interesting question. I may have to Google this real fast. What's the baseline and max of ACE? We were talking about the ACE values. Do you
Um,
have that in front of you?
I don't think I wrote it. I have so many notes on this.
So
Um,
a below average season, it looks like ACE is 75 or below. Near average is 75 to like 125. And above average is 125 and above.
oh yeah, yeah. I think right in
There it
right.
is. There it is. Yeah. So your
The two
numbers are
hundred
more
fingers there.
specific than my quick climate prediction center search. Here,
Yeah,
let me bring you full. Put that back up. If I can, hold on. There.
I think I have the ace number. Oh, there it is. Oops, I'm pointing at the wrong thing. But it's extreme, above average, and then below average.
Yeah.
Were those numbers right there?
Yeah. So
So extremes 156.9, above average 126.1, I believe they had, and then below average 73. But I think they said anything kind of closer to 100 or below is you're kind of in that below average range.
Right. Michael, I know you guys are right on the button with the South, but I wish you guys would look at New England because you're so good at it. When we get hit, it's usually bad because we're not used to hurricanes. Nor'easters, yes. Hurricanes, no.
Well, you could show them what we were discussing.
Yeah, I mean, we did point this area out for you. It was a storm system October 24th, 25th. It was a winter storm system, and we're highlighting it again. Is it a hurricane moving in? It's not a hot spot. It's kind of just an area of interest that, perked us up. But, those dates, write them down in your calendar. Those dates do stand out to us as something, and very, very possibly we'll have another kind of Henri type scenario, because this part of the pattern, Jeremy, if I recall, is much closer to the coastline because it was a nor'easter than Henri was. Henri, if I remember, stayed near Bermuda for its first few cycles.
Yeah. So really anything that kind of is off the East Coast or up the East Coast, we'll keep an eye on. But yeah, I would say New England down through parts of the Northeast coast, that part of the pattern there probably should be watched. And again, that's more like maybe not early in the season, but more like probably peak season.
Yeah. So definitely that early to mid September, right as we're getting that, that mid latitude support and all that other fun stuff. And, that a fish named Wanda comes out of the corner and just shows back up because it was always there. Kim says, you two make a great team. Love how the paper and e-calculations line. Well, and what's so neat about this is the fact that, Jeremy and I we work very closely together, but we do make our own forecasts and then compare notes. And I feel like they because the science is there, I feel like it's so nice when it's like, oh yeah, we're on almost the identical page. And frankly, I think I had one other area highlighted that was really subdued, and Jeremy was able to explain to me because I'm still, but the Padawan learner here compared to, old man Nelson over there. I'm able to continue to learn and grow from your, long history using this.
Yeah, and we still talk to. I learned it when I was working in Kansas City with Gary Lezak, who the LRC, he sort of studied it, developed
he's
it.
The L.
What?
He's the L of the LRC.
Yes, he is the L of the LRC. But even yesterday, I talked to him. He kind of sent Eric and I some of his thoughts that he had.
Yeah.
And obviously, when you're living and breathing tropical weather day in and day out, year after year, these forecasts I think are easier to make than when like Gary's in the Midwest. So his really the LRC there for him is huge in making winter predictions and maybe some severe weather predictions in the spring. So for him, it's more useful in that regards. LRC for us, I feel like many more people are interested with hurricane season.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, when he did send us his information about hurricane season, it was pretty much in line with what we had. I mean, it was, It was right there.
Yeah. Everyone kind of approaches it maybe slightly different, but our results are pretty much the same.
And when you start to see, people in Coffee Talk, we share the BSR. When you see the BSR indicating the same features as the LRC, and then now, like the Floreaster come March, I'll just pop that up again. There it is. That's the Floreaster cycling through again in March. When you see everything indicating everything you expect, it's like, holy cannoli. All right, there you go. It just confirms, I think, these hotspots as being sound. So, I think.
I'm a little curious if that repeat of that coming up around November 14th-ish or so.
March 14th.
15th, it seems like it's a little quick right now, and I know those models are still 10 plus days out. It seems like it's a little quick.
Yeah, the GFS has it on March 12th, and it should be about March 14th-ish.
Right.
Yeah.
I think so. A good example of using this in maybe not a tropical hurricane sense, obviously in Savannah, St. Patrick's Day is like the biggest day of the year when it comes to like an event, a celebration. And on February 17th, could have done this like even farther in advance, but I was kind of just like, oh, hey, 1 month from today, it's St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
put out the St. Patrick's Day forecast. And obviously, with the parade here and everything, you want dry weather. So we'll see how it plays out. But I went March 13th to 15th, that system moving through. And then drier weather should take hold for like a day or two. And then there's kind of another little system that comes in behind it. So, I mean, it's not only tropical forecasting, this can be used for a lot of different forecasts.
And now that the hurricane season forecast is finished and put out to the world, the public, now I can get back to doing my monthly forecasts. I've kind of had to hit pause on that for a little bit. It just ran out of time. So,
I mean, I think probably if you take a look at the LRC this year, in previous years, obviously some things that have really stood out have been these tropical systems in the fall that were huge indicators.
yeah.
I would say this past fall, and again, maybe not for tropical weather, but the number one thing that stood out to me was some of these potential for huge severe weather outbreaks coming up.
Yep. Yeah. The Kentucky tornado outbreak is a monster indicator.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we had a little bit of that again this last cycle. Wasn't as strong as what in December.
Right.
But that will be coming back again probably in sort of that middle-ish part of April.
And that plays into the whole idea of it peaks and then it drops off and then it peaks.
So I believe that's right around about the third week.
Yeah. So
somewhere in there.
Put that in your calendar as something to watch for sure. Jeremy, anything else before we say thank you so very much for your time?
No, hopefully the season plays out like we think, and maybe it can be a little bit quieter for a change.
I would love that very much, even though your area and my area are sitting in the red hotspot zone. So we'll have to watch and see how that plays out. All right, Jeremy Nelson, WJCL Chief Meteorologist. First off, thank you for the friendship. Thank you for teaching me, Anakin, and thank you for everything else, Master
Eric is the graphics guru, the fancy charts guru.
With this year, and I know I've shown everybody kind of a brief glimpse, but this year we've learned to be able to track the LRC in real time to see if we're running a little fast or a little slow. So I feel like every year we're kind of taking more and more steps forward, and it's just amazing how it works. Yeah. All right. Jeremy, go. Have a great morning, buddy. Thank you so much for your time, bud.
All right. Take care. See ya.
All right. Bye. All right. There you go. Jeremy Nelson, Chief Meteorologist at WJCL. What do you guys think? It's, so much work. So much work goes into that forecast. Jeremy has become such a great friend. It's so funny. If you look at my text messages with Jeremy, let me just find like the images. It's literally, it's all weather information or it's either all weather information or like that. I think he sent that to me like, oh, the GFS is picking up on the Florester. So anyway, really, really excited to finally get this out there. What does this mean for us, right? What does this mean for us? It means that we just need to be prepared. It means that this year, while we are expecting about an average number of storms, we need to know that Florida is going to be one of those focal points, okay? My full write-up is going live inside wesh.com right now, okay? This is the long-winded deal. The full write-up inside wesh.com, all right? So check it out. I am going to go publish that right now, and then I'm going to the Cape to cover the rocket launch. Be the sunshine in someone else's day, would you? Thank you so much for hanging out for this special edition of Coffee Talk. I will see you guys and gals later on for our afternoon update at 3:30.